catapult where we benchmark Sharjah with the top cities in the world. We studied the market and investment, the interfirm activity, knowledge and R&D, skills and human capital, infrastructure and culture, and finally, we've also benchmarked the governance and policy. This is one of the biggest projects that we have in the park, which is Skyway. Here we have Merlin Sustainable Technologies. They have a complete sustainable ecosystem where it runs on aquaponic, solar panels, even wind turbines as well. They have a complete system which is independent by itself. It also has a water desalination plant over there. So this is a Spanish company. It's Civil Twin Renewable Middle East. They focus on solar PV panels. And you will see later that we have the 3D printed house here at the park. It's actually powered by solar PV panels. Nepta Health is one of the companies registered here at the park. It focuses on women health and non-communicable diseases. We also have Sharjah Open Innovation Lab, which is a 3D printing lab. It also has a textile, wood cutting, metal, even 3D printing. It's a versatile lab, which is open for students and innovative people who want to come there and test the 3D printing and other machines as well. We have a collaboration with the American University of Sharjah. The framework of it focuses on four main things, which is IP spin-off and licensing, entrepreneurship programs, employment and internship to support human capital development, and also we are partnering in labs. So this is the 3D printing, 3D printed house that we have here at the park. It's an AUS-based project as one of the graduate students from the American University of Sharjah collaborated with the professor, Dr. Adil Tamimi, and also with Jinko, one of the companies here, and they have produced a 3D printed house. We also have another research project with AOS, which is the conductive concrete. This is also another example of one of our research projects with the American University of Sharjah, which is the exoskeleton. The students are doing massive work to produce and to develop the exoskeletons, which is a outside skeleton which supports the movement of handicaps or even people who work in factories or to lift heavy equipment. So this is like some examples of our activities and global initiatives for 2020. We had the first Women in Technology Forum in collaboration with Women in Technology. And we are launching the second one as well, the second Women in Technology Forum this year as well. We also launched our first accelerator program, which was the Sharjah Advanced Industry Accelerator. It was a virtual accelerator, actually. We also had the MENA Innovation Technology Transfer Summit, where we had 5,000 plus participants from 100 countries participate and join us. We had ministries and global CEOs participate as well. We have also launched the Sharjah Angel Investors, which is a connection which provides the opportunity for startups to pitch their ideas to the angel investors. Overall, we've had a lot of diplomatic and government events here at the park, but currently, unfortunately, due to the pandemic, this has slowed down or stopped completely for the time being. We have also launched 3D printing emerging tech exhibition as well. We have showcased some of the capabilities of the 3D printing technology and what it can do. Some of the students actually participated and showed some amazing work which they have produced themselves. So our upcoming activities, Women in Technology, as I mentioned, which is going to be completely virtual for now. We're also launching this year the MENA Innovation Technology Transfer Summit as well. Thank you. So up next, we will have Mr. Imad Haffar, which he is the Director of Security Consultant Team at Kaspersky. Mr. Imad is an experienced information security professional with a demonstrated track record working in the domain of cybersecurity. He is responsible for managing and guiding a team of security consultants with the sole objective of supporting and growing Kaspersky enterprise business in the region. Mr. Imad, you have the mic.
Thank you so much, Hamda. Thanks a lot for the great introduction and for giving me the opportunity to be part of this event. Good morning, good afternoon, even good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us in this session. And as Hamda said, just to give you a quick background about myself, I manage the security consultants team at Kaspersky Middle East, Turkey, and Africa. And part of what we do, myself and my team, is talking to our enterprise clients and government agencies all over the region to try and understand their cybersecurity challenges, their requirements and their strategies, and then see how we can help them to fulfill these requirements and strategies. Personally, I've been in the domain for probably 13 years now, and almost 19 years in ICT as a whole. I hold a master's degree in information system management from University of Liverpool and multiple technical certifications. So I'll be sharing my slides with you if you give me a second. Today, essentially, we'll be talking about the security of cloud services. And this is in particular related to how we can offer security, how we go about performing that activity, understanding the threat landscape and understand the threats around and surrounding cloud setup, and then how we tackle these threats in the best way possible. Now, before we get into that topic, a few words about the degenerate trend in the market today, which is no secret, obviously. The whole world is going toward the cloud services, be it the businesses of all sizes, government agencies, even individuals, for many of the obvious benefits that it brings to the operation side, the cost, the agility and the ability to hit markets and to stay agile in the face of the changes in the economy. Gartner predicts that by 2022, the worldwide spending on public cloud alone should exceed...
Mr. Imad, sorry to interrupt, but can you please raise your voice? Absolutely. The voice is very low, yeah. Thank you.
Is it better now?
Yeah, it's better.
All right, so apologies for that. So the idea here is that to stress again on the fact that the world is going towards the cloud services, and the spending and the appetite of all companies and governments is to adopt cloud services for all the obvious benefits of these services, which I won't touch upon during my session. I think what does matter to us as cybersecurity professionals is two things. One, to realize that usually cyber criminals, they are after the targets that are worth their time and effort. And obviously, the more companies and the more businesses and governments move toward the cloud, the more of a tempting target they become for cyber criminals. This is also a trend that we see right now. I mean, the increase in attack quantities and even techniques used in these attacks against cloud services. And obviously, this is a trend that's there to continue. The second thing is probably I would say the sad fact of the matter, which is businesses in many cases would rush into adopting cloud services, and then they end up with what we call a large margin of error. So by trying to catch up with their competitors and really the market trend, just moving from the traditional way of managing and building IT infrastructure to the cloud would leave many of the configuration and many of the loopholes really in the environment available for the cyber criminals to take advantage of, to exploit, and then penetrate their infrastructure. As a matter of fact, in a report we released probably a year ago, and we were trying in that report to understand the factors affecting data breaches in the cloud services. We find out that almost 90% of all data breaches in particular in cloud services was caused by or were caused by human errors. That means, in some sense, if the teams responsible of cloud services, the people responsible of managing, maintaining, and transforming businesses into cloud, had the in some cases the exact understanding of how these services work, what are the particular threats targeting cloud services, the large majority, at least, of these breaches could have been avoided. And I think what again matters to us here as cybersecurity professionals and security consultants is to be able to understand the fundamental concepts of these technologies and these services, so that when we talk to our clients, when we try to set the best strategy and the best approach to protect these services, we have exactly the pain point, we have the clear understanding of the tools and the probably even skills that we need to protect these different offering of cloud services. So I won't spend a lot of time on this particular slide, but essentially what I'm trying to touch here is that it's important to understand the difference between, say, public cloud and private clouds, how hybrid cloud is formed, what is managed hosting, what is infrastructure as a service, what's the difference between software as a service and platform as a service, for example, just to name a few, of course, of the too many cloud offering. And as you probably know by now, the level of, let me say, intervention of the end user with these services would be different based on the offering they choose to use. So, for example, with public cloud, the end user, they don't really have visibility and access to the underlying physical infrastructure of the cloud. So, in some sense, they don't really have to, consider the physical security of the cloud and the cloud service, but they still have to focus on protecting the workload, protecting the virtual machine itself, and so on. Where this might not be the case exactly when we talk about private clouds. Private cloud, the business owns the underlying infrastructure as well as the upper software and cloud layer as well. So in that case, they are responsible of protecting all these different layers and have in place the proper controls to monitor and protect these different layers. So, but the one shared thing I would say, or shared thing I would say among all these offering is the fact that protecting these services and these offering is a shared responsibility between the end user and the service provider. There is always part of this security control, which we can call the security of the cloud, which essentially means how the cloud offering and how the cloud service is being protected. And then there's the security for the cloud, for the workload running on top of these cloud services, which obviously is the part of the user. This is essentially driven from or let me say, needed to cover probably one misconception among some of cloud users, which is once you move into cloud services, you don't have to particularly pay any attention to security because the virtual environment is being protected, is protected by the cloud provider, when in fact this is not the case at all. Obviously, the scope of responsibility between the end user, and the cloud provider would be different from one case to another, depending on which service the client choose to use. But definitely there is always part that is up to the end user to manage and to keep in check, so that the whole cloud environment and cloud setup is protected. Now, when we try to set somehow a list of the things that we need to keep in check as security consultants, what are the let me call them domains? What are the aspects that we need to keep in check so that we maximize the protection of any cloud setup, and really try to account for any threat and penetration route possible in that specific environment? So the list obviously would contain a lot of controls, and it can be expanded even further depending on the environment itself. This is a very dynamic kind of list, and usually we go about that exercise with every setup for us to understand how the cloud environment is structured, and then where we need to focus our attention, where we need to direct our resources, our capabilities, what controls we need to have in place. So as I mentioned earlier, probably, for example, the physical security of the underlying cloud services potentially may not be the role or the responsibility of the end user, especially when we talk about public cloud offering, because that is the part which is being managed by the service provider. But nevertheless, in certain occasions, especially with sensitive entities, government entities as well, still even the part which is not managed by the end user has a big importance and big value to the end user to understand how the service provider is maintaining, securing, and operating that layer for them. Is the physical security, for example, of the underlying infrastructure good enough for my business, for the sensitivity of the data and the business processes I run, how critical they are, and so on. Also, I would say that many of these domain are obviously shared between the physical and the virtual world. But once we move into cloud services, we also have to keep in mind that there are particular domains that are only could only exist in a cloud setup, or potentially they would increase in value and importance once we move into a cloud service. For instance, I can mention the identity and access management role, the API management. This is quite important when we talk about public cloud offering, especially that the vast majority, if not all, embedded services and embedded capabilities in cloud services, public cloud services, are depending or built on top of API calls. So having deep understanding how these API are structured, what kind of calls are allowed, how they interact with internal and external services, is also something very critical and probably more important to cloud setup than any other potential IT setup. Now, obviously, because this list can expand tremendously, and because it can be daunting to go about reviewing and let me say cover or protecting every single part of it, it would be a good idea as well to adopt some kind of a prioritization process. There are multiple work platforms, that would allow security consultants to understand or assign criticality to each security control, and then put somehow a plan how they would, again, direct their available resources, their attention, to which control at which stage of the cloud migration or cloud operation journey of the client. The cloud workload protection platform is one of these examples. And as you can see, usually they segregate those core functions from the fundamental to the still required but less probably critical for cloud environment. Nevertheless, everything would still be of value to protect the cloud workload, but this definitely would help us to prioritize and understand how we can go about implementing these requirements. Now, there is another way which also we as security consultants use to understand the specifics of the cloud setup we're reviewing, is to look at the cloud requirements from the threat perspective, from the threat actor perspective. In there, we build what we call a threat profile, and essentially we look at the potential threats and the potential penetration routes that could target these setup, and how they would utilize any tools, implement any tactic, use any technique to reach and attack, penetrate these cloud setup again. Many of these, of course, threats, once again, they're shared with the physical world, the physical setup of computers and networks. But once again, few things are specific to cloud setup again. So once we talk, of course, cloud, we talk virtualization. So we have now to think of the hypervisor security. We have to think about VM locality and migration, how the, again, API calls happening in that environment. We need even to think of the what's called virtualization aware threats. And these are threats that are created in a way that they will evaluate the environment where they operate and then take different action based on whether or not it's a virtualized environment or not. And here I have an example that I thought to share with you about that specific capability. Now, because this is something unique, actually, we do see that in a lot of malware, especially recently with the more organizations and government adopt and use sandboxing technology, for example. So the technique called anti-sandboxing technique. And essentially, as I said, it means that the malware would set silent for a period of time based on the fact that it runs in a virtual machine. Now, the reason I'm bringing this example, the sunburst example, because it utilizes that technique in a different kind of attack, which is a supply chain attack. This is an attack that was announced in December of last year. Our friends at FireEye, they identified this, the threat actor targeting a company called SolarWind, and they are a very well-known company producing IT administration tools. And they targeted this organization with a Trojanized .NET package. And that was a supply chain attack, which means SolarWind wasn't the actual target of the attack. It was only a vehicle to carry that malicious payload to the actual targets. Many organizations worldwide got infected with this threat actor because they use SolarWind tools, and this package was part of the update procedure of one of their administration tools. The interesting fact here is that when we examined this, malicious payload, it had implemented exactly the same technique, which essentially meant that the Trojanized payload was silent on the target machine for approximately 2 weeks, doing absolutely nothing before it started communicating with the command and control servers to carry on and to complete the attack. So as I said, this is usually the technique we see to evade detection in sandboxes in specific, because usually when the malware reaches the endpoint, it looks for a certain set of artifacts, and these artifacts would help the malware to determine if this is a virtual machine. If it is, there is a good chance that this is a sandbox, a security researcher trying to monitor the activity and behavior of that application, and as such, it doesn't execute. It waits for a certain period of time before it starts its malicious activities, if at all. Now, this relates to our topic today because it led to a misconception at with some of the cloud IT administrators into thinking that because the workload is virtualized and because this technique is there with many of the recent malware, then just because you're running a virtualized environment, it means that the malware won't target that virtual machine, won't infect and execute on a virtual machine. And so the virtual machine is protected. Now, obviously, while this has some technical background to it, but it can't be the right approach to set up and build the security of the workload. Rather, we need to think of how to utilize the tools and the techniques we have to protect this workload without relying on an external factor which may or may not be in our favor. Another thing which is specific to cloud services, or rather we have to touch upon when we talk about cloud services, is obviously virtualization, because this is the underlying enabler of cloud services. And with virtualization, again, looking at it from the security aspect, cybersecurity aspect, we have to account for a number of new threat vectors, which may not necessarily exist in the physical world. Some of these not necessarily have to be from an external source. They could be internal. I mean, an internal misconfiguration potentially that would lead to a service outage or creating vulnerabilities that can be exploited by threat actors. For example, the vulnerability window on newly created or dormant virtual machine between the time they were updated and when they started again. This creates a huge gap of missing patches which need to be addressed as soon as possible to prevent any exploitation. Whether or not to use any agents, security agents on those virtual machines, and if this actually demolish the whole idea of resource optimization using virtualization in cloud setup. Scan and update storms. These are very important aspects as well. And this is usually happen when all the virtual machines in one on top of one hypervisor, one hardware hosting these virtual machines, they all start to scan, they all start to update at the same time, which obviously overload the hardware of the hypervisor, the host machine, and potentially it could even cripple the hypervisor and render any service running on top of it unusable. So definitely, to address that, we try to come up with a more scalable kind of approach, where we try to take advantage of the technologies and the capabilities of the virtualization layer, especially again in cloud setup, and then use that technology in our favor to provide the needed protection to these virtual machines without affecting their performance, without creating any new loophole, any new vulnerability potentially from within the infrastructure. One of these techniques that we use, for example, is what we call the security virtual appliance, which essentially protects the whole hypervisor using a single dedicated virtual machine that is always on, always updated, always maintained. So it doesn't really matter how old, new, updated or not updated the virtual machine is on that hypervisor, because the minute it's booted up and it's online, it's immediately protected with that virtual appliance. And just last word about the the whole offering within Kaspersky that we essentially use to keep hold of all these tools, all these the services, and even the consultancy services that we provide under hybrid cloud security architecture, and essentially where we keep a close eye, keep a close monitoring, or keep monitoring rather all the work payload across different setup, be it on the physical infrastructure, the virtual, or even the public clouds, and then provide the security and IT administrators the ability to monitor these setup, understand the current security posture of every single node in their IT infrastructure, and then obviously from that point onward, be able to determine which security controls they need to have in place, they need to enable, they need to work with to protect and provide the needed security for their workloads. Thank you very much. That's all for me for now.
Thank you very much, Mr. Imad. It was very interesting hearing about the cloud computing, the securing of the cloud virtualization, and about the data breaches to the cloud and the causes of that. So up next, we will have Mr. Faris Hassani. He is the CTO ambassador for Dell Technologies. He is the digital and technology senior consultant with almost 10 years of experience across the Middle East, Turkey, and North Africa. Mr. Faris combines a unique blend of corporate consulting and entrepreneurial experience. Mr. Faris, the mic is yours.
Thanks a lot for the introduction, Hamdad. Thank you, everyone, in fact, for attending this session. It's a pleasure to be with you here. In this session, we will be discussing the multi-cloud strategy from Dell Technology, how we think about it, and to give you a preview on the trends of what's happening in the market. At the end, we will be taking your questions, so please feel free to put them on the Q&A button that you have on Zoom. So to start with, I trust that everyone agreed that the current state, if we look at the current state of the digital enterprise, this is changing, and it's changing at multiple layers. For the last 20 years, maybe, like we can say that we had this tendency to go and consolidate as much as possible on the level of the enterprise data center. So we tend to move everything and to centralize it on an existing data center, and to build sort of fences around it, if we can say so, from security perspective. So it was easy to do it in this perspective. Lately, we have seen this sort of extension to the public cloud providers. Plenty of players are coming into the picture with the likes of AWS, GCP, Amazon, Microsoft, and IBM also, and Oracle are going to this space. We have been using a lot more and more of the software as a service style. Every organization now is using sort of Office 365 type of Salesforce, Google Drive even, and the Google Business Suite that we have around it. So our sort of how we manage IT is expanding. And also what we are seeing is that with the new technologies coming into perspective, the stuff like 5G network, where you will have features like ultra low latency, enhanced machine-to-machine communication, with the IoT concept in this perspective, we are having less and less latency, and we are seeing more of technologies maturing in this place, like augmented reality, digital twins when it comes to manufacturing and others. And all of this has been enabled by this sort of low latency that comes to 5G. So with this technology, we are having a sort of an extension of our network. So we tend to use like our existing network in our data center, but nowadays corporation and corporates need to think about 5G as an extension of their existing network, which would help accelerate and make sure that we have this extended topology that serves user, employees, and others. I'm going to focus on two main concepts out of this expansion of 5G, which are the rise of a concept that we call the cloud data collocation. Now we have moved to this idea of having the sort of a repository that where you put your data but can be accessed by multiple compute resources. Either they are sitting on a public cloud, on your prem, on a software as a service, or others. The other main trend that we are seeing in the market is the edge and what we call the edge proliferation, which is a very simple concept, because nowadays, in fact, you need to have your compute power and your processing power, because it's needed on a real-time perspective, to be as close as possible to your data source. And from this perspective, we can identify at least 4 types of edge, maybe more would be coming in this perspective. And 2 of them will be sitting on the 5G network, which are one which is close to your to the users. The other is like at the aggregation level of the 5G network. And you will have edges on your factories, on your hospitals. Everyone is talking now, in fact, about telemedicine, manufacturing, being able to generate a lot of data through their resources, through IoT concepts. And also you'll have public cloud providers coming to the edge with stuff like Amazon AWS Outpost, Microsoft Azure Stack Hub, GCP with Anthos, and all the concept around it. So we have this change in topology and the rise of the edge. So traditionally, like Imad was saying during his presentation, we were having this long debate, in fact, for a long time between private cloud versus public cloud, which technology is going to prevail at the end. So the answer to this is very simple, and this is what we have seen being applied to a lot of customers. It's not private or public cloud, it's private and public cloud at the same time. So this is where you are going to hear, in fact, like private public cloud has become sort of an obsolete concept. Now we're talking about multi-cloud. And the main question that organizations and individuals need to ask is how much of each is right for me. So depending on the type of services, depending on the type of workload that you will be putting over there, you will decide where to place your application. And this is where we start talking about something like application factory that we're going to touch base at the end of this presentation around, which is taking those applications, either they are bare metal, containers, virtual machines, applying sort of serverless architecture, and based on their criteria, we will decide where to put them. So some machines or some workloads would make sense to put them on-prem because they are stable, they are steady. Some virtual machines or some workloads which have this spiky behavior or unstable behavior, we can put them on the public cloud provider. Some application that require certain type of analytics being offered by AWS or GCP or Microsoft, like big tables or others, we can put them on the public cloud provider. So we are going to see a huge shift in the way that organizations work, and they need to be ready in this perspective to make sure that they leverage the best of every cloud provider. So when we talk about cloud computing and public cloud or multi-cloud, people tend to think about cloud as a destination or a sort of they see it from a public cloud perspective. However, for us at Dell Technologies, we see it as an operating model. And there are challenges that have happened when moving to cloud environment. And we're sharing this to make sure that everyone in the future who considers this sort of approach would take them into consideration. So the first difficulty to moving to cloud environments is the type of workloads that you currently have in your environment. We tend to always talk about technical debt. So we have been running our legacy data centers for a long time. We are running legacy applications with existing storage, existing compute and network. So we have built all our architecture around this. And even our applications, some of them and a lot of them aren't ready to be what we call the cloud native type of application. So this needs refactoring, migration over there. So this is something that we need to take care of when we decide to move to the cloud, because just moving VMs from one data center to another is not going to bring you a huge deal of operational benefit. The second thing is the complexity around operating multiple cloud. And when we talk about cloud, we talk about the services that are being generated from this perspective. So I want to consume, let's say, this module in terms of serverless architecture with Python, Ruby, or others. I want to use the IoT model from Azure. However, I don't have this sort of the multi-cloud, let's say, sort of hub that can talk to those multiple clouds, that can have a consistency around my policies in terms of identity access management. If I want to move, let's say, my VM from Azure to AWS or to my on-prem, I want to make sure that not every time I need to redo the work again. So this is where the importance of having this sort of let's say, what we call this layer, or the operating system that can go across multiple cloud provider. And this is where Dell Technologies and VMware are doing a huge work in this perspective with VCF, that we are transforming it to become the operating system of the cloud area. So also there is another aspect, which is every type of organization inside the system is working by themselves. So we have the developers going and applying their own strategy, different than the IT guys, different than some other business segments. So we need to make sure that we have this sort of alignment. Otherwise, we have seen that plenty of those cloud migrations didn't deliver on what has been promised. So we need to make sure that we have the right strategy in this perspective. And when we talk about cloud migration and moving things outside of your existing data center, there are three types of laws that needs to be considered. So the first one is the law of physics, which can be, let's say, summarized in the data gravity and the data latency. Data gravity is having the data as close, the compute as close as possible to the data source, and data latency is about how fast you want to take the decision. So if you want to have a quick decision to be made in this perspective, you need to have it as close as possible. Then you have the laws of economics, and from operations perspective and from finance perspective, the cloud has come with a certain model, in fact, which is moving the capex, the capital expenditure, into this sort of operational expenditures. And this has come to a change, and we need to be careful as well on how we address this perspective. Renting isn't always cheaper than buying. And if we give the example of cars, for example, you don't go and, let's say, if you go and rent a car for, let's say, $20 a day versus buying a car which costs you maybe like around $10,000, it depends on how much you are using the car. So if you are using it on a daily basis, buying a car would be cheaper for you. So we need to make sure that we understand the economics behind this, as well as what we call the laws of lands, which are very important in terms of the governance, the compliance, and how to make sure that we abide by the laws of the place we are in, because plenty of public cloud providers aren't present in every country in the region. So we need to get the most, in fact, of our clouds. So this is a tool for innovation. And when we talk about innovation, we don't talk only about technology or software or hardware. We talk about changing the model that this organization is operating in terms of people, processes, and making sure that things work in a different way, in an agile way. And there are two books that I usually recommend in this perspective for considering, let's say, the change in the models, which are the Phoenix Project and the Unicorn Project, which are, let's say, a sort take you through the digital transformation of IT organization. Most importantly, we need also to build on a secure, reliable infrastructure. Imad addressed this in this perspective, and seeing security in the cloud needs to be done in an intrinsic way. You need to look at things from an integrated perspective. It goes from the endpoint to the private to the public cloud data center, and we need to make sure that all this area is secured, as well as protecting our IT investments and meeting SLAs, because there is no organization in the world, unless they are doing a greenfield, that will be having, in fact, a sort of fresh investments for their IT setup. So in summary, in this perspective, the cloud for us, as we said, it's not a location, and this is This is the way that we look at it. It's an operating model. So as we said, we need to combine all those aspects, the private, the edge, and the public cloud with consistent infrastructure, consistent operations to make sure that we provide them with a specific SLA in this perspective that will be capable to give the developers and the organization the scale, the economy of scale and economy of speed that they will need in order to expand and to realize the innovation factor that they are looking at. So how to approach, let's say, a sort of the cloud digital architecture. First of all, this needs to be a sort of a centralized IT-driven strategy. We cannot go, in fact, and have different types of siloed approach where everyone in the organization goes and discuss what he wants in this perspective. We need to deliver consistency, and this is very important. So we need to go towards automating as much as possible on the operation levels, on the hardware level, on the operating system level, and managing the lifecycle management of those need to be more and more automated due to the huge data growth that we are seeing. And we cannot keep working in the same way that we're doing. And we have seen like a huge number of softwares in this perspective, coming into the picture with Ansible, Terraform, and others. Also, understanding the economics behind your organizations, making sure that you have the right economic model is very important, because for a lot of organization, IT is not a core business. It's a sort of a support function. Plenty of them still look at it at cost center. However, this is changing after the pandemic and the need for every organization to become digital, and also the security becoming as a sort of an integrated part of the strategy. We don't have this fence that we used to do anymore. In fact, that we used to build around our existing data center. So our vision of security needs to change as well in this perspective. The components of a successful cloud operation or cloud operating model can be summarized in moving towards a sort of IT resources delivered as service, IT operations being simplified, so you don't spend time on managing your existing setup and your existing infrastructure. You need to have the capability to scale because historically we used to have those types of projects where we initiate a project, we make sure it's working, it's implemented, and then we go back to normal. With the changes and the things that we are seeing and the continuous innovation that we're seeing, this model cannot be applied. So you need to give scalability and you need to give speed to the people so they can innovate all the time. Modern commerce experience, all the vendors, either from legacy perspective or public cloud providers or hardware vendors, are changing their commerce experience from CapEx expansion to CapEx expenditures to a sort of an OpEx one. So we are seeing more and more around charging based on instances and based on consumption. So this is going to become the prevailing model, even with the traditional hardware vendors like HP, Dell, and others. Developers are the most essential portion in this perspective, and we need to make sure that they have the right strategy. So we have moved.
Thank you very much, Mr. Faris. I'm sorry, we are running out of time, and we have. Yeah, I'm very sorry, but we'll have to move to question and answers before the end of our session today. Sure. So I'll take the first question from the audience. How can I be sure that the cloud-based applications can be customized to meet the exact needs of my business? I'm not sure if this one's for Mr. Ahmad or Mr. Faris.
Sorry, but Hamda, your voice was cutting, so if you can repeat the question, no, I didn't hear.
Okay, I'm sorry. How can I be sure that cloud-based applications can be customized to meet the exact needs of my business?
Okay, so this is where it was part of my slide. So you need to put what we call an application factory in this perspective. So you need to make sure to look at the application first of all in which language it has been written. If this is something that you can move, for example, to a certain public cloud provider and run it there, because only few versions of models, let's say, are supported on a sort of a serverless architecture. So you need to study what are the components of your applications, which operating system you're running, which type of dependency that you have. And this is very important because every application has dependencies around it in terms of databases, in terms of web servers, in terms of security and others. So you have to have this holistic approach, and there are plenty of tools in the market that would help you do this. So either from a public cloud providers or others or independent ones, that they will come, they will do an assessment, and they will see if those applications are ready for movement to the cloud or not.
Thank you. The next question is for Mr. Imad. What are the major problems of cloud security?
Well, Habda, as I highlighted in the presentation, I think the same issues that we usually would encounter in a physical setup do apply to a virtual environment. Now, of course, we have to account to some changes in the nature of the service being provided. So essentially, there are certain threats and threats model which may not necessarily be there in the physical domain, yet they are applicable on the cloud setup and virtualized environment as well. For example, even the misconfiguration of it does have a big role. So it's not always that we have to encounter external threat actors. It could be potentially a internal misconfiguration of the service, which might lead to a potential vulnerability that, again, potentially might cause an exploitation.
Thank you. Checking the questions now. What is the best practice in securing cloud computing?
Well, first of all, I would say the best practice is to first of all have a good understanding of the cloud infrastructure and the cloud setup that is used. Faris highlighted that it could be public, private, or a mixture of both. It could be anything else, really. So it is critical for the end user and as well as for the consultants as well to understand the exact nature and the setup of the cloud infrastructure, because only then we will be able to set a clear strategy, a clear approach on how to go about protecting the cloud environment. There are many things that are pretty much standard across different implementation, but once again, it might be the case where you have a special case that needs a special way of implementing the either a new security controls or the control itself in a different ways to provide the correct protection for that cloud setup.
Okay, I'll be taking the last question now. So COVID sped up the digital transformation by 6 years. What are the business opportunities which have been created by the cloud?
I'll take this one. So in fact, this is true. So like the way that things have accelerated, we were like this was happening in a way or another. In fact, and if you read, like, let's say the trends, the way things were going, maybe in 10 years we have reached where we are now. So everything now is enabled by digital. Like we're working now, we're doing everything, that all our work has been enabled by this sort of a of digital transformation. The opportunity there is huge. Like we will keep doing this. In fact, in a fast pace. Every organization need to be digital, and like you can see it from social technology and all the aspects of our life. Now we're not going to supermarkets to a certain extent. Everything is through applications, and you have seen the surge of the number of applications that have come into the picture. Every business is changing their model of engagement, and we're just gonna see this being accelerated. AI, machine learning is gonna become, in fact, more and more sort of a the de facto, let's say, tools that are being used by organization, there's a big interest around data science and making sure not only to analyze data, because this can be done in fact by tools, but also to get the insights and apply them in a good way for businesses. So the opportunity there is very interesting. There is a very nice book as well. It's called Life 3.0 for a guy called Max Tegmark that talks a lot about artificial intelligence and how things would be progressing. So I would also recommend it.
Thank you very much. So to our participants, that will be the end of our session today. It was a pleasure having you, Mr. Faris and Mr. Imad, for our session today. We had a great discussion. Thank you. We look forward to you joining us for our future webinars.
Thank you, Hamda. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Hamda, for the opportunity. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.